The decision of a struggling single mother to help a stranger in a split second changes the course of two lives. Years later, an unexpected reunion on a university campus reveals what human kindness or evil can do to people across generations. Not everything is what it seems. You won't believe it. Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The fluorescent lights of Save Mart buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the tired faces of after-work shoppers. Melissa Thompson, a petite woman in her early 30s with worry lines etched around her eyes, maneuvered her cart through the crowded aisles. Her 6-year-old daughter Emma trailed behind, one hand clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, can we get the rainbow cereal?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with hope as they passed the colorful boxes. Melissa's heart clenched. "Not this time, sweetie. We need to stick to our list, remember?" She forced a smile, trying to mask the anxiety that had become her constant companion since becoming a single mother 2 years ago. As they approached the checkout, Melissa mentally tallied their groceries, praying she'd calculated correctly. Her last paycheck had barely covered rent, and her next wouldn't arrive for another week. Every penny counted. The line inched forward, and Melissa found herself behind a young man in a wrinkled suit. He shifted from foot to foot, tension radiating from his hunched shoulders. When it was his turn, he placed a modest selection of items on the conveyor belt: a loaf of bread, peanut butter, some apples, and a few cans of soup. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, scanned the items efficiently. "That'll be $23.47, sir." The young man fumbled for his wallet, producing a worn debit card. He swiped it once, twice, 3 times. Each attempt was met with a harsh beep from the machine. Melissa watched as the color drained from his face. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I thought I had enough. I'll put something back." As he reached for the bread, Melissa felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to help. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward. "Wait," she said, touching the young man's arm gently. "I'll cover it." The man turned, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "Please," Melissa insisted, already pulling out her own card. "Let me do this." As the cashier processed the payment, Melissa caught Emma watching the scene unfold, her young face a mixture of curiosity and concern. The young man gathered his groceries, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." Melissa shook her head. "Just pay it forward when you can." He nodded vigorously, then hurried out of the store, leaving Melissa to wonder about the story behind his struggle. As she paid for her own groceries, the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. $23.47. It wasn't a fortune, but in her precarious financial situation, it might as well have been. She'd have to dip into the emergency fund she'd been slowly building, or maybe skip her morning coffee for the next month. But as they left the store, Emma's small hand in hers, Melissa couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. "Mommy," Emma said, her voice filled with awe. "That was really nice what you did." Melissa squeezed her daughter's hand. "Sometimes, sweetie, we all need a little help, and when we can give it, we should." As they walked to their old sedan, the weight of her grocery bags matched only by the weight of her financial worries. Melissa couldn't shake the image of the young man's grateful face. In that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter how tough things got, she would never lose sight of the importance of kindness. The following weeks proved challenging for Melissa. As she sat at her small kitchen table, bills spread out before her, the impact of her spontaneous act of generosity became painfully clear. The $23 she'd spent on the stranger's groceries now meant the difference between paying her electric bill on time or incurring a late fee. Melissa rubbed her temples, fighting back the headache that threatened to overwhelm her. The apartment was quiet. Emma had been in bed for hours. These late nights, poring over bills and budget sheets, had become a ritual, one she carefully hid from her daughter's eyes. As she reached for her calculator, a memory of the young man's face flashed in her mind. The relief in his eyes, the tremor in his voice as he thanked her. It had felt so right in the moment. But now, faced with the harsh reality of her own struggles, doubt crept in. Was it worth it? She whispered to herself, the question hanging heavy in the air. The next morning, as Melissa rushed to get Emma ready for school before her shift at the diner, her daughter's voice cut through her stressed haze. "Mommy, can I bring an extra sandwich today?" Melissa paused in the middle of packing Emma's lunch. "Why, sweetie? Are you extra hungry?" Emma shook her head, her pigtails swinging. "No, it's for Lily. She forgot her lunch yesterday, and she looked really sad." The simple request hit Melissa like a punch to the gut. Here she was, agonizing over her decision to help a stranger, while her 6-year-old daughter instinctively understood the importance of helping others. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Melissa nodded. "Of course, Emma. That's very thoughtful of you." As she prepared the extra sandwich, Melissa felt a mix of emotions wash over her: pride in her daughter's kindness, shame at her own doubts, and a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, things were tight, and yes, she'd have to make some sacrifices. But the values she was instilling in Emma, those were priceless. That evening, after tucking Emma into bed, Melissa returned to her pile of bills. This time, instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a new determination. She picked up an extra shift at the diner, cut back on her own little luxuries, and managed to scrape together enough to cover all the essentials. It wasn't easy. There were nights when dinner was more creative than appetizing, trying to stretch their groceries to the last day before payday. There were mornings when Melissa longed for the coffee she'd given up, but each time she felt the pinch, she remembered the young man's grateful face and Emma's proud smile as she packed that extra sandwich. As weeks turned into months, Melissa found that her impulsive act of kindness had shifted something fundamental in her outlook. Yes, life was still a struggle, but she approached each day with a renewed sense of purpose. She volunteered at Emma's school when she could, always kept a few dollars aside for the homeless man on their street corner, and made sure Emma understood the value of community and compassion. One night, as she kissed Emma goodnight, her daughter sleepily murmured, "Mommy, you're the nicest person I know." In that moment, all the sacrifices, all the extra hours and tight budgets, felt insignificant compared to the warmth that flooded Melissa's heart. She realized that in trying to teach Emma about kindness, she had also taught herself a valuable lesson: that even in the hardest times, there was always room for compassion. Time marched on, bringing with it a cascade of changes for Melissa and Emma. The years seemed to blur together in a whirlwind of school projects, part-time jobs, and the everyday challenges of single motherhood. Through it all, the memory of that night in the supermarket remained a touchstone for both of them, a reminder of the power of kindness in a world that often seemed indifferent. As Emma grew from a pigtailed first grader into a thoughtful teenager, Melissa watched with a mixture of pride and amazement. The little girl who had once marveled at her mother's generosity now embodied those same values in her own life. Emma volunteered at the local animal shelter, tutored younger students, and always seemed to have a kind word for those who needed it most. Melissa's own journey was marked by both triumphs and setbacks. She had slowly climbed the ladder at the diner, eventually becoming a manager. The promotion brought a welcome increase in salary, but also longer hours and more responsibility. There were nights when she came home exhausted, her feet aching and her mind buzzing with the day's challenges. But even on the hardest days, Melissa never lost sight of the lesson she'd learned years ago. She made it a point to know her employees' stories, to offer an understanding ear or a helping hand when needed. Her reputation for fairness and compassion made the diner a place where people wanted to work, and regular customers often commented on the warm atmosphere she fostered. As Emma's high school graduation approached, Melissa found herself reflecting on the long road they'd traveled together. Sitting at their small kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures and financial aid forms, she marveled at how far they'd come. "Mom," Emma said one evening, looking up from a particularly daunting scholarship application, "do you remember that man in the supermarket? The one you helped when I was little?" Melissa nodded, surprised. It had been years since they'd spoken of that night. "Of course. Why do you ask?" Emma's eyes shone with a mix of admiration and determination. "I was just thinking, that moment, it kind of shaped both of us, didn't it? I mean, we didn't have much, but you still found a way to help someone else. It's why I want to study social work. I want to be able to make that kind of difference in people's lives." Melissa felt tears prick her eyes. All the late nights, the tight budgets, the missed school plays when she couldn't get off work. In that moment, it all felt worth it. She reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've grown into an amazing young woman." As they returned to the pile of applications, Melissa felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. College was expensive, and even with scholarships, they would be stretching their resources to the limit. But looking at Emma, her face set with determination as she tackled each form, Melissa knew they would find a way. The next few months passed in a blur of graduation preparations, dorm shopping, and bittersweet lasts, the last family dinner before college, the last summer vacation together. Through it all, Melissa held on to the pride and joy of seeing her daughter prepare to embark on her own journey. On the night before they were set to drive to Emma's new college, Melissa found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the living room, where boxes of Emma's belongings sat ready for the morning's departure. Her eyes fell on a framed photo on the mantel. Emma at her high school graduation, beaming with pride, her arm around Melissa's shoulders. Melissa picked up the photo, tracing her daughter's smile with her finger. She thought about the scared, struggling single mother she had been all those years ago, and the woman she had become. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been rich with love, growth, and countless small acts of kindness, both given and received. As she set the photo back down, Melissa felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Pride in Emma's accomplishments, anxiety about the changes to come, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path that had led them here. Whatever challenges the future held, she knew that the foundation of compassion and resilience they had built together would see them through. With a deep breath, Melissa headed back to bed. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in their lives, and she was ready to face it, one act of kindness at a time. The late August sun beat down on the car as Melissa navigated the busy streets of the university town. Emma sat beside her, alternating between excited chatter about her upcoming freshman year and nervous silence. The back seat was crammed with boxes and suitcases, containing the physical pieces of Emma's life they were about to transplant into her new dorm room. As they approached the campus, the streets became clogged with other cars full of parents and new students. Melissa felt a lump form in her throat. This was it, the moment she'd been both anticipating and dreading for months. "Look, Mom!" Emma exclaimed, pointing out the window. "There's my dorm!" Melissa followed her daughter's gaze to a red brick building with ivy climbing its walls. Students and parents milled about on the lawn, unloading cars and exchanging tearful hugs. The scene was at once exciting and overwhelming. After finding a parking spot, they began the arduous process of unloading the car. Melissa insisted on carrying the heaviest boxes, despite Emma's protests. "I'm not that old yet," she joked, even as her arms strained under the weight. As they made their way to Emma's assigned room, Melissa's mind wandered back to her own college days, cut short when she became pregnant with Emma. She pushed the bittersweet memory aside, focusing instead on her daughter's bright future. Emma's roommate, a friendly girl named Jess, had already arrived and was setting up her side of the room. The two girls immediately fell into excited conversation about classes and campus life. Melissa busied herself with unpacking, trying to give them space while fighting the urge to soak up every last moment with her daughter. After a few hours of organizing and arranging, Emma's side of the room was beginning to look lived in. Melissa stood back, surveying their work with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Her little girl was all grown up, ready to start her own adventure. "Hey," Emma said softly, coming to stand beside her. "You okay, Mom?" Melissa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She pulled Emma into a tight hug, closing her eyes against the tears that threatened to fall. A knock at the open door interrupted their moment. "Everything going all right in here?" a warm, male voice asked. Melissa turned, wiping discreetly at her eyes, and found herself face to face with a man in his late 40s, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks. His kind smile and the name tag on his chest identifying him as Dean Michael Reeves immediately put her at ease. "Yes, thank you," she replied, returning his smile. "Just finishing up." As Dean Reeves chatted with Emma and Jess about their upcoming freshman year, Melissa found herself studying his face. There was something oddly familiar about him, a nagging sense of recognition she couldn't quite place. It wasn't until he turned back to her, extending his hand in farewell, that it hit her. Those eyes, she'd seen them before, filled with gratitude and relief. The supermarket, all those years ago. "It was nice meeting you, Miss Thompson," Dean Reeves said, shaking her hand. "Emma's in good hands here." Melissa nodded numbly, her mind reeling. Could it really be him? The struggling young man she'd helped on a whim, now standing before her as a respected university dean? As he left the room, Melissa sank onto Emma's newly made bed, her legs suddenly weak. The world seemed to spin around her as the implications of this incredible coincidence began to sink in. "Mom?" Emma's concerned voice broke through her daze. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Melissa looked up at her daughter, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. "Emma," she said slowly, "I think I need to tell you a story." The drive back to the hotel was a blur for Melissa. Her mind raced with the implications of her unexpected encounter with Dean Reeves. Emma had listened to the story of the supermarket incident with wide-eyed amazement, but Melissa had held back from approaching the dean. Now, alone in her hotel room, doubt and indecision plagued her. She paced the small room, her thoughts a jumbled mess. Should she seek out Dean Reeves? Would he even remember her? And if he did, what then? The rational part of her brain argued that it was best to leave the past in the past. After all, it had been a small act of kindness, hardly worth mentioning after all these years. But another part of her, the part that had always believed in the ripple effect of good deeds, couldn't let it go. What if that moment had been as pivotal for him as it had been for her and Emma? Melissa sank onto the bed, her head in her hands. She thought about how that one decision had shaped her life, had become a cornerstone of the values she'd instilled in Emma. But what if she was reading too much into it? What if Dean Reeves didn't remember at all, or worse, felt embarrassed by the reminder of a difficult time in his life? Her phone buzzed, startling her out of her reverie. It was a text from Emma. "Mom, I can't stop thinking about your story. You should totally talk to Dean Reeves. It would be amazing if it's really him." Melissa smiled despite herself. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, even from a distance. But still, she hesitated. What if she was setting herself up for disappointment? As night fell, Melissa found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned, the day's events playing on repeat in her mind. She thought about the struggling young man in the supermarket and the accomplished dean she'd met today. The contrast was stark, yet those eyes, she was certain they were the same. By morning, Melissa was no closer to a decision. She went through the motions of getting ready for the day, all the while debating with herself. As she prepared to head back to campus for the final parent orientation sessions, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from Emma, a selfie with her new roommate, both girls grinning widely. The caption read, "First day of classes, wish me luck." Looking at her daughter's excited face, Melissa felt a surge of emotion. Emma was embarking on a new chapter of her life, facing her fears and embracing new experiences. Wasn't it time for Melissa to do the same? With a deep breath, she made her decision. She would find Dean Reeves and introduce herself properly. Whatever came of it, recognition, confusion, or something in between, at least she would know. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would bring closure to a chapter of her life she hadn't realized was still open. As she left her hotel room, Melissa felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She had no idea what the day would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to embrace the unknown. Melissa's heart pounded as she approached the administration building. The campus was alive with the excitement of a new semester, students rushing to and fro, their voices filling the air with a constant buzz of activity. But Melissa barely noticed any of it, her mind focused solely on the task ahead. She had managed to find out that Dean Reeves' office was on the 3rd floor. As she rode the elevator up, she rehearsed what she would say, each scenario playing out in her mind. What if he didn't remember her? What if he did, but wished she hadn't brought it up? The elevator doors opened, and Melissa stepped out into a quiet hallway. She followed the signs to the dean's office, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. As she approached the reception area, her courage nearly failed her. But the image of Emma's excited face in the photo from that morning steeled her resolve. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked with a friendly smile. Melissa took a deep breath. "Yes, I was hoping to speak with Dean Reeves. I don't have an appointment, but..." Before she could finish, a door opened, and Dean Reeves himself stepped out. He was engrossed in a file he was reading, nearly bumping into Melissa before he looked up. "Oh, I'm sorry," he began, then paused as recognition dawned on his face. Ms. Thompson, isn't it? Emma's mother? Melissa nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. Yes, that's right. I was hoping I could have a word with you, if you have a moment. Dean Reeves looked at her curiously, but nodded. Of course. Please, come into my office. As Melissa followed him into the spacious room, she couldn't help but notice the degrees and awards adorning the walls. This was a man who had clearly worked hard to get where he was. It made what she was about to say seem even more presumptuous. What can I do for you, Miss Thompson? Dean Reeves asked as they sat down. Melissa took a deep breath. This might sound strange, but do you remember an incident at a supermarket about 15 years ago? A young man whose card was declined, and a stranger paid for his groceries? Dean Reeves' brow furrowed in confusion for a moment. Then slowly, his eyes widened in recognition. That was you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Melissa nodded, her own eyes filling with tears at the memory. I wasn't sure if you'd remember. It was such a small thing, really. But Dean Reeves was shaking his head, his expression a mix of disbelief and emotion. A small thing? Miss Thompson, that moment. You have no idea what it meant to me. He stood up abruptly, walking to the window. When he turned back to face Melissa, his eyes were shining. I was at my lowest point that day. I had just lost my job. My girlfriend had left me, and I was about to be evicted from my apartment. I felt like a complete failure. Melissa listened, transfixed, as Dean Reeves continued. Your kindness. It wasn't just about the groceries. It was a reminder that there was still good in the world, that someone could look at me and see a person worth helping, not just a loser who couldn't even buy food. He walked back to his desk, pulling out a small, worn notebook from a drawer. I've carried this with me every day since then, he said, handing it to Melissa. She opened it carefully. On the first page, in neat handwriting, were the words, Remember the kindness of strangers, pay it forward. That moment changed the course of my life, Dean Reeves said softly. I promised myself I would work hard, get back on my feet, and dedicate my life to helping others the way you helped me. Melissa felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. I had no idea, she whispered. All these years, I've wondered if I did the right thing, if it made any difference. Dean Reeves reached out, clasping her hand in his. It made all the difference in the world, Miss Thompson. And now, to think that your daughter is starting her journey here, under my care, it feels like life has come full circle. They sat in silence for a moment, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of this reunion. Finally, Dean Reeves spoke again, his voice filled with warmth and gratitude. Thank you, Miss Thompson, not just for what you did that day, but for the ripple effect your kindness set in motion. I've tried to live up to that moment every day since. As Melissa left the office a while later, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She had come seeking closure, but instead had found a beautiful affirmation of everything she believed about the power of kindness. Walking across the sunlit campus, Melissa felt a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't wait to share this incredible story with Emma. More than that, she couldn't wait to see what new acts of kindness, big and small, the future held for both of them. The following day, Melissa found herself sitting across from Dean Reeves' Michael, as he had insisted she call him, in a small cafe just off campus. The morning rush had subsided, leaving them in a quiet corner to talk. Melissa cradled a steaming mug of coffee, still processing the incredible turn of events. Michael took a sip of his own drink before speaking. I've thought about you so many times over the years, he began, his voice tinged with emotion. I always hoped I'd get the chance to thank you properly someday. Melissa shook her head, still amazed. I never imagined. I hoped that small act had made a difference, but this... She gestured at their surroundings, at Michael's success, at the serendipity of their reunion. Michael smiled, understanding her amazement. Let me tell you what happened after that day, he said, leaning forward slightly. He painted a vivid picture of his life back then, a recent graduate, drowning in student debt, struggling to find his footing in a tough job market. The day Melissa had helped him, he'd just been laid off from a temp job and had hit rock bottom. Your kindness. It was like a lifeline, Michael explained, his eyes distant with memory. It wasn't just about the groceries. It was the reminder that I wasn't alone, that there was still goodness in the world. Inspired by Melissa's act, Michael had redoubled his efforts to turn his life around. He'd taken on multiple part-time jobs, living on a shoestring budget to pay off his debts. During his free time, he volunteered at a local community center, finding purpose in helping others who were struggling. It was at the community center that I discovered my passion for education, Michael continued. I saw how knowledge could empower people, give them the tools to change their lives. This realization had led Michael back to school. He pursued a master's degree in education, working nights to pay for his studies. It hadn't been easy. There were times when he'd nearly given up, when the mountain of challenges seemed insurmountable. But every time I felt like quitting, I'd remember that day in the supermarket, Michael said, meeting Melissa's eyes. I'd remember your kindness, and it gave me the strength to keep going. After completing his master's, Michael had started as a high school teacher, eventually working his way up to principal. His dedication to helping underprivileged students had caught the attention of the university, leading to his current position as dean. In every role, I've tried to embody the kindness you showed me, Michael explained. I've made it my mission to support students who are struggling, to be the helping hand that you were for me. Melissa listened, awestruck by the far-reaching impact of her simple act. She thought of all the students Michael must have helped over the years, the lives touched by the ripple effect of that one moment in the supermarket. But that's not all, Michael said, reaching into his bag. He pulled out a well-worn journal and placed it on the table between them. This is where it all started. He opened the journal to the first page, where Melissa saw the familiar words, "Remember the kindness of strangers. Pay it forward." I've kept a record of every act of kindness I've done or witnessed, Michael explained, his voice soft with reverence. Each one inspired by what you did for me. As Michael flipped through the pages, Melissa caught glimpses of the entries, a scholarship fund he'd started for struggling students, mentorship programs he'd initiated, even simple acts like buying coffee for the person behind him in line. All of this, Michael said, gesturing to the journal, to himself, to the world around them. It all started with you, Melissa. Your one act of kindness set off a chain reaction that's touched more lives than you could ever imagine. Melissa felt tears welling in her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Michael was sharing. She thought of all the times she doubted herself, all the struggles she'd faced as a single mother. To know that through it all, her small act of compassion had sparked such profound change. It was almost too much to comprehend. As they sat there, two lives intertwined by a moment of kindness, 15 years in the past, Melissa felt a sense of wonder at the mysterious ways the universe worked. She had come to drop off her daughter at college, never expecting to find a lost piece of her own story waiting to be rediscovered. The weeks following Melissa's reunion with Michael flew by in a whirlwind of emotion and activity. She had extended her stay in town, unable to tear herself away from the incredible story unfolding around her. Emma, thrilled by the serendipitous turn of events, had insisted on hearing every detail of Michael's journey. As Melissa prepared to finally head home, she found herself sitting with Michael in his office once more. The initial shock of their reunion had faded, replaced by a comfortable familiarity that felt both new and decades old. "I can't believe I'm leaving tomorrow," Melissa said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "Part of me feels like I'm abandoning Emma, and, well, this newfound connection." Michael nodded understandingly. "It's a big change for both of you. But Emma's thriving here, Melissa. And as for our connection," he smiled warmly, "I have a feeling this is just the beginning." They spent the next hour discussing plans for the future. Michael shared his ideas for expanding the university's support programs for struggling students, his eyes lighting up as he talked about creating a formal mentorship initiative. "I'd love for you to be involved," he said earnestly. "Your perspective, your experience, it could be invaluable to our students." Melissa felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect. "I'd be honored," she replied. "But I'm not sure how much I have to offer. I'm just a diner manager, not an educator like you." Michael shook his head firmly. "You're so much more than that, Melissa. You're the embodiment of the values we want to instill in our students: kindness, perseverance, the power of small actions to create big change." As they continued to talk, the outline of a plan began to take shape. Melissa would visit the campus regularly, speaking to students about her experiences and the importance of compassion in everyday life. She would also help develop a program to support single parents pursuing higher education, drawing on her own journey raising Emma. "It's funny," Melissa mused as their meeting drew to a close. "I came here expecting to start a new chapter in Emma's life, but it seems I'm starting a new one in mine as well." Michael smiled, reaching across the desk to squeeze her hand gently. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? 15 years ago, I never could have imagined I'd be sitting here, in this position, talking to you like this." As Melissa stood to leave, she felt a sense of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. The future stretched out before her, full of new possibilities and opportunities to make a difference. "Thank you, Michael," she said softly. "Not just for this opportunity, but for showing me that my small act of kindness all those years ago really did matter." Michael stood as well, his eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you, Melissa, for everything. I promise you, the best is yet to come." As Melissa walked across the campus one last time, she felt as if she were seeing it with new eyes. The students rushing to and fro were no longer just faces in a crowd, but individuals full of potential, each carrying their own stories of struggle and triumph. She thought about Emma, embarking on her own journey of growth and discovery. She thought about Michael, whose life had been so profoundly changed by a single act of kindness. And she thought about herself, the scared, struggling single mother she had once been, and the woman she had become. With each step, Melissa felt lighter, more purposeful. She had come to this campus to let go of her daughter, but instead, she had found a new calling, a new way to spread the kindness that had shaped her life. As she reached her car, Melissa took one last look at the sprawling university behind her. She wasn't saying goodbye, she realized. She was saying hello to a whole new chapter of her life. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Emma hurried across the quad, her backpack heavy with books. Her first semester at college had been a whirlwind of new experiences, challenging classes, and unexpected friendships. But today, her mind was focused on one thing: her upcoming meeting with Dean Reeves. As she entered the administration building, Emma couldn't help but smile at the twist of fate that had brought her mother's long-ago act of kindness full circle. Dean Reeves had become more than just an administrator to her. He was a mentor, a living connection to a pivotal moment in her family's history. "Come in, Emma," Dean Reeves called as she knocked on his office door. He greeted her with a warm smile, gesturing for her to take a seat. "How are your classes going?" They chatted about her academic progress for a few minutes before Dean Reeves leaned back in his chair, his expression turning more serious. "Emma, I wanted to talk to you about something important. It's about the new mentorship program we're launching next semester." Emma listened intently as Dean Reeves outlined the program, an initiative designed to support students facing personal or financial hardships. "We want to pair struggling students with mentors who can offer guidance and support," he explained. "And I was hoping you might consider being one of our first student mentors." Emma felt a surge of excitement. "Me? But I'm just a freshman." Dean Reeves smiled. "You're not just a freshman, Emma. You're someone who understands the value of kindness and perseverance. Your mother's story and your own experiences make you uniquely qualified to help others who might be struggling." As Emma left the office later, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. She thought about her mother, who had been visiting the campus regularly to speak with students and help develop support programs. The pride she felt in her mom's newfound purpose was immeasurable. That evening during their weekly video call, Emma excitedly shared the news with Melissa. "Mom, it's amazing. It's like your one act of kindness is still creating ripples, even now." Melissa's eyes shone with pride and love. "Oh, Emma, you have no idea how happy it makes me to hear that. You know, when I helped Michael all those years ago, I never imagined it would lead to all this." They talked late into the night, discussing Emma's classes, her new role as a mentor, and Melissa's growing involvement with the university's outreach programs. As they were about to sign off, Melissa paused, her expression thoughtful. "Emma, I want you to remember something," she said softly. "No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. What you do for others, it can change lives in ways you might never see. Always be kind, always be compassionate. You never know how far those ripples might spread." As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, she reflected on the incredible journey that had led her to this point. Her mother's spontaneous act of kindness in a supermarket 15 years ago had set off a chain of events that was still unfolding. It had shaped her childhood, influenced her choice of study, and now was guiding her into a role where she could help others. In the years that followed, Emma would often think back to this moment, to the valuable lessons she had learned about the power of compassion. As she mentored struggling students, volunteered in the community, and eventually embarked on her own career in social work, she carried with her the story of a single mother's kindness and a stranger's gratitude. And so, the ripple effect continued, spreading outward in ever-widening circles. From a chance encounter in a supermarket to a university campus, from a mother to a daughter, and from one generation to the next, the simple act of helping a stranger in need had blossomed into a legacy of kindness that would touch countless lives for years to come. In the end, Melissa's impulsive decision to help a struggling young man had not only changed his life and hers, but had set in motion a beautiful chain reaction of compassion and generosity. It served as a powerful reminder that in a world that can often seem dark and uncaring, a single act of kindness can illuminate the path forward, not just for oneself, but for all those whose lives we touch along the way. What did you think of the story? Please leave a comment with your opinion. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will surprise you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. See you soon.